So, because you said epilepsy was sort of like your specialty, could you give me an idea of what all comes under epilepsy? Like,
Yeah, having decided I wanted to do neurology, I got some junior doctor's jobs and and was exposed to epilepsy at a time when there were quite there was a lot of interest in developing new treatments and new approaches and for a lot of neurological diseases. So this is back in the very early 1990s. We didn't have much in the way of treatments, which altered the disease process. So we didn't have disease modifying treatments for things like multiple sclerosis, which are now common day treatments, and and we were developing an epilepsy surgery program, so brain surgery for people with epilepsy. So there was a lot going on. There was a kind of an inspirational leader, David Chadwick, who turned out to be my mentor for a long time. And I think that your career path is often very influenced by what you're interested in, but also the people around you and how they motivate you and stimulate you and mentor you. And I had a really good exposure to epilepsy as a young clinician, and then as a junior researcher, and I've spent most of my clinical and my research career in epilepsy. And you asked me earlier a bit about what epilepsy contains, and one of the fascinating things about epilepsy is that it is so kind of heterogeneous, and there's a lot going on and a lot of questions that we've got to answer, and a lot of things that we need to consider in clinical practice. So we say that people have got epilepsy when they are susceptible to having epileptic seizures. And one thing to say is that seizures are really a symptom of something going on in the brain. So whilst you might think about epilepsy being one condition, it's actually thousands of different conditions that manifest as seizures, and we're on a journey to try and understand the biology of those conditions. And the other area of heterogeneity is that there are lots of different types of epileptic seizures, ranging from episodes where people might get just a strange feeling, maybe a feeling of deja vu, butterflies feeling in their tummy, to episodes where people might go blank, stare, lose awareness, and behave automatically, through to episodes that everyone would recognize as an epileptic seizure, where somebody will collapse and be stiff and shaking on the floor for a few minutes. And the other area of complexity is that it can start at absolutely any age, and it can be something that starts shortly after somebody's born, and it can start later on in people's lives. And because our population is changing, we've got more older people in our population now. It's actually more common to diagnose epilepsy in older people than it is in children. So I think often we think of epilepsy as being a disease of children, but it's not. It's something that can start at any age, a bit more common in children than that kind of middle life, but actually it's much more common now in older people, as we're accumulating damage to our brains from strokes and circulation disease and head injuries and brain tumors and so on. So whilst you might think epilepsy is just one condition, why is that so interesting? Well, actually, it's really fascinating. It happens at any age. There's lots of biological processes going on that we need to understand, and there is also massive impact on human life. So it's a really stigmatizing condition. There's still a lot of myths around epilepsy. So people with epilepsy still feel stigmatized to some extent, even in what we might think of a more modern society, a more progressive age, and it impacts on employment, education, fertility. It has massive ramifications. So it's a really broad and fascinating area to be involved in.
That's amazing, Tony. So the absolute, you say heterogeneity of epilepsy. Is there a specific subtype of epilepsy you particularly research, or is it all epilepsy, or is that just not possible?
Yes, so I'm an adult neurologist. So and again, the way we kind of carve things up in health services is you're someone that sees children up to the age of 16, or you're someone that sees adults from the age of 16 or 18 onwards. So I'm an adult neurologist. So I tend to see people over the age of 16. So that people may have had a diagnosis in childhood, and then they get transferred to me as an adult neurologist. But yeah.
Yeah.
Lost the track of the question there, sorry.
No, I know you spoke about different types of epilepsy. So I think you've got like myoclonic seizures and other types of seizures. Is there any that you particularly like to research more? I know as a neurologist, I'm sure you'll see all sorts, but in terms of research, is there a specific one that you think you like to research more, or requires more research, or you just find particularly interesting?
Yeah. So the kind of questions we've focused on in our research program is thinking about early epilepsy. So not necessarily thinking about types of epilepsy, but thinking about where people are in their journey, and that point of diagnosis and the treatment choice at the diagnosis is really mission critical, because you've really got to get it right at the start, because that's your best opportunity to get people back to education, back into work, back driving and functioning in society. And sometimes the eye is drawn to the complex, and we'll probably talk about that later. But I think from a kind of a public health point of view, we do the best thing for society when we get it right at the start of someone's journey, and make sure that they're not disadvantaged by not having their condition as well controlled as it might be. And practically, we think about two main types of epilepsy, particularly in adulthood. And when we think about epilepsy where seizures start in one place in the brain, and we call that focal epilepsy. And there's probably about 2/3 of people in adulthood have got a focal epilepsy. Seizures start in one place. And when we have kind of paradigms and treatment approaches for that. And then there's about 1/3 of people that have got what we might think about as being a generalized epilepsy, and during for those people, seizures start on both sides of the brain at the same time. And the cause of that is probably mainly genetic. Although we're still on the journey to really unpick the genetic architecture of the epilepsies. And then there's a much rarer group of epilepsies which will tend to present in childhood, some of which are really severe and associated with learning difficulties and other significant health problems. We think, again, that's a group of conditions that we think of as largely being genetic. These are the conditions that you may see on the news. Conditions, for example, there's a condition called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and a condition called Dravet syndrome. They're the conditions that we might use cannabis for, and that's something that's been on the news quite a bit. But they're really quite rare types of epilepsy.
Yeah, I think last week we briefly spoke about HM and off on the after side of the memory side, but he had epilepsy, didn't he, where they had to cut part of his temporal lobe, I believe, or his entire temporal lobes. Is that usually where the epilepsy starts in the temporal lobes, or can it be anywhere in the brain?
Yeah, so epilepsy tends to start at the front of the brain, so either in the frontal lobe or the temporal lobe, and I think we readily recognize temporal lobe epilepsy as a condition. Most people think about, well, do I have an aura before my seizures? I think it's pretty common parlance, isn't it? People understand that this notion of an aura, and with temporal lobe epilepsy, the sort of auras that people might get is kind of deja vu, strange taste, strange smell, butterflies feeling in their tummy. And those symptoms are actually coming mainly from the inside bit of the temporal lobe, something that we call the hippocampus, and in front of that there's something called the amygdala. And we recognize that bit of the brain is susceptible to scarring. So one of the most readily recognized types of epilepsy is temporal lobe epilepsy, so seizures that are coming from the temporal lobe, and it is generally coming from that inside bit of the temporal lobe. And for a long time, we've been aware that sort of epilepsy often doesn't respond well to medication. We can't stop the seizures with medication, and so surgery might be the best option for that person. So can we cure their epilepsy or reduce the severity of their epilepsy by cutting out their temporal lobe? And most of that surgery is actually focused on this hippocampus inside bit of the temporal lobe. And some units do an operation whereby they only take the inside bit out, and others do an operation where they take the whole of the temporal lobe out on one side. And interestingly, people can function really well without one of their temporal lobes. And often you're taking out a temporal lobe that wasn't functioning very well. So we often worry about memory, but actually, if you're taking out a damaged temporal lobe that wasn't really functioning very well from a memory point of view, then the other side's taken over anyway.
Yeah, but just not both of them. Otherwise,
yeah, take both out. It's a disaster. You end up with somebody with zero memory.